Okay, we are live, my friend. Let's see if we get them together. Okay. Let's make sure everything is working. Hello, Nofar. Ma shlomech. How are you? Okay, guys, you ready for action? Esther, please, if you don't mind. I'm not picky. Whatever you have is good. Whatever you have is good. Okay, we ready, my friend? Okay, if you're watching, if you can comment so I can see that you're watching, that'd be great. If you're watching on Chabad.org, say hi. I don't know if I can see the comments. Last week I couldn't see comments on my personal page. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. You're the best. Thank you. Okay. Perfect. Okay, we ready, my friends? Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if anyone's watching on Chabad.org. Okay, so showtime. We want to welcome Randy back. It's been a pleasure. We missed you, Randy. Planet, huh? So today's class may actually feel like Randy's came back from Poland from the March of the Living. We'll hear after the class. He'll give us a whole, tell us all about it, please. So today's discussion actually very much fits to where you were and to Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron, after Yom HaShoah, but the idea of remembering those that have been lost to the Jewish people. Let me first start off by saying, my camera was unplugged. All right, don't think we're starting with the problems already. One second, let's just understand why we don't see my camera. One momentum, my friends. Okay, we're back. We're back. Don't get lost. We're here. Okay, and if you're watching on Chabad.org, the thing slow connection. I don't know why. We have to do some of the internet here. Okay. So tonight's class is, how are you? Tonight's class is in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef and all those that need a healing and a refuah shlema, and it's a memory of all of the Kedoshim, all the holy martyrs, all those beautiful Jews. Sadly, the many have passed away in the last year. But let me begin with a little story. So there's a famous classic story of a pig and a chicken that are walking down the street. Okay? The pig and the chicken are walking down the street, and they pass by a breakfast place, and they see a sign, bacon and eggs, breakfast, I don't know, $5.99 for bacon and eggs. So the chicken to the pig says, look at us. We're feeding the world. Bacon and eggs. We're the ones that are giving everyone their food. So the pig says to the chicken, two are both giving the people their breakfast. But for you, it's only a donation. For me, it's a commitment. This story is a very, very true story. Very true story. For me, for you, it's a donation. For me, it's a commitment. That in Jewish, what I'm looking for, not in literature, but in Jewish values, in the Jewish totem pole of importance, there's nothing holier, nothing more kadosh, more special than someone that gives their life to die al kiddush Hashem, to sanctify their very life, their very existence, their very identity for the sake of the name of God. It's called dying al kiddush Hashem. When someone dies al kiddush Hashem for the sake of God, they receive the automatic status of kiddushim, of martyrs. Kiddushim, last week's class was all about being holy, but that was in the context of how God wants us to live a life of holiness. A person that is killed for being a Jew is automatically considered holy. In fact, the Rambam writes this explicitly. The Rambam writes that anyone that dies just because they were Jewish. So we're not even going to talk about the soldier of the IDF. Any Jew that's killed for no reason other than they're Jews living in the land of Israel. And for that sin, people full of hate have found it worthy and righteous and justified to kill them. That person is automatically considered of the holiest of the Jews. And we'll say as soon the story in the Gemara about this idea, they're considered Kedoshim. Yesterday, Sunday, it was Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. It is Israel's Memorial Day, if you want to use English terms, although it's not in any way comparable, because a Memorial Day, at best, some people go to a short little service where they wave the flag or whatever for a few minutes, but most Americans don't even know what Memorial Day is about. They're not in school, so they just go hang out in the park, and then they have a barbecue, and they eat hot dogs and sausages. There's no emotional feeling. There's no connection in any way. Unless your family, that's someone in your was a vet and served in the army, then your family does something to remember it. Otherwise, everyone is connected. Everyone celebrates Yom HaZikaron. Not only celebrates, that's not the right word. Everyone feels Yom HaZikaron. But this year, if you read the Israeli news and you know what's going on, good evening. Thank you for joining us. So if you read the American news and you know what's going on in Israel, you know that, you can sit right here in the front, that's fine. Hello, Adrian. And remind me your name, Orna? Orna, there. Pull that table forward. Okay. So, if you follow what's going on in Israel, and the Israelis can probably validate what I'm saying, the mood in Israel this year was unlike any other year. It was a much more somber year. It's also the year we lost more people than any other year. So in the last year alone, since last year's Yom HaZikaron until this year's Yom HaZikaron, 766 soldiers were killed just in the last year. And another 61 disabled veterans died other injuries in previous years. And we lost 822 civilians to terror in the last year. We stand 531 men, 291 women, which brings to a total of 25,000 something soldiers or people serving in the defense of Israel since they started counting, and a total of 30,140 Kedoshim, people that were killed in the land of Israel. Okay? So this past year was a horrific year. And so the feeling, the mood of everyone as Israeli soldiers speaking here, was it last week? Feels like a long time ago. He's saying in Israel, everyone knows somebody. No other thing, in general, two Jews get together, start playing Jewish geography. Oh, you grew up there. We find mutual friends. But in Israel, it's much, much more. And the variety of Jews that were killed on Simchas Torah, and then the variety of Jews serving in the army, not only Jews, even non-Jews, but Jews serving in the army, from the religious to the non-religious to the anti-religious, they're all serving together, that all of Israeli society is mourning and commemorating the loss of so many Jews this past year. So the topic of conversation tonight is not a usually uplifting conversation. It's a little bit more and sad, although it's not any less important. In fact, it's perhaps even more important. Is the idea of a Jew being willing to die and to give up their very life al Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of God's name. Now, it happens to be that besides for this week being Yom HaZikaron, this week's Torah reading is where we're introduced to the mitzvah of being willing to sacrifice your life for the sake of God. For the sake of God. Being willing to give up everything you have. I titled the class, Giving God Everything We Have. We know that a Jew has to be willing to give God not just a little donation, not just I'll do a mitzvah for you on Rosh Hashanah, I'll come to synagogue, I'll give up 3 hours of my day or of my year, give me a Jew for a few hours in the year, and then that's good enough for me until next year, Yom Kippur. To be willing to give God every have, including our life. We say that in the Shema every morning and every evening. We say, "V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha." You shall love Hashem your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might, with all of your soul, your very life. be willing to give God the very life we have to serve God. So, this week's Torah reading, we are introduced to a very interesting verse. What does the Torah tell us? So you all, if you're sitting here in the room, you have in front of you, you're sitting in the room, you have in front of you a sheet, text. 1 second, let me just bring up the thing on the, bring it up here on the as well. So it's from this week's Torah reading, chapter from the Vayikra, chapter 23. The verse is like this. God is giving a bunch of laws to the Jewish people, and then God says to the Jewish people as follows. I have right here. You should not desecrate my holy name. I shall be sanctified amidst the children of Israel. I am Hashem. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who took you out of the land of Egypt to be a God to you. I am the Lord. Okay, so this is the verse. God says two things. Number one, don't desecrate my name. Number two, sanctify my name. I mean, she explains to us right here. We have the Rashi. Rashi says, don't desecrate my name by transgressing my commandments intentionally. By doing a sin, you could be desecrating, creating what's called a chilul Hashem, which is not tonight's conversation. But then, what do we learn by the scripture adding the second part of the verse where it says, I shall be sanctified amidst the children of Israel? So the Torah, Rashi explains it based on the Torah's Kohanim, that the Torah is telling us as follows. A person must be willing to surrender your life and do not transgress God's commandments and thus sanctify my name. When a Jew's life is being threatened, he's willing to give up his life for God. This is the ultimate sanctification of the name of God. When people see how you're willing to give everything you have, even your life for God, that's the greatest Kiddush Hashem, the greatest glory to the name of God that could exist. Then Rashi says something fascinating, which will be a topic of conversation, and I've been struggling with it all day. When one sacrifices oneself, question. Rashi, very quickly, his name is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He was a French rabbi. He is the foremost commentator on the Torah. It's a good question. He's the foremost commentator on the Torah. He is the classic commentator on all of Torah. You cannot learn Torah, the Bible, or Talmud for that matter, without the commentary of Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, or in short, Rashi. He lived in the 12th century in France. So but this commentary, Rashi, is actually quoting something called Torah's Kohanim, which is medrash written by the rabbis at the same period of the Talmud, of the rabbis of the Talmud. So, like a few centuries before him. So this is the quote. When one sacrifices oneself, one shall do so with the willingness to die. Anyone who submits to sacrifices himself, while assuming that God will surely perform a miracle for him and save his life, for this person, God will perform a miracle. For so we find in the case of three famous prophets, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that when the evil Nebuchadnezzar threatened to throw them into a fiery furnace, they did not submit themselves on the condition that God would perform a miracle. Now, before I read the verse that Rashi quotes, let me first give you the context, okay? There were Jews that were taken into exile in the times of the first temple. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, and the Jews are now in exile in Babylon. The king is a tremendously egotistical man. His name is Nebuchadnezzar, like all dictators have always been, right? They've been very self-obsessed. And he built himself a statue. I forgot the measurements off the top of my head. I read it just a few minutes ago, like 60 meters high, and of himself, a big gold god. Not to bow down. And he calls all of his ministers and all of his advisors and all of his noblemen, anyone that had any kind of job or importance in the country, to come to the inauguration and the dedication of this massive statue / idol made in his image that everyone should worship. I think 60 cubits tall of gold, like a massive thing. And everyone is gathered, and he says in the verse that when the trumpets will blow, and the harp and the lyre and the flute, and there's a very, very poetic, and everyone should bow down and prostrate to worship before this God. There were Chaldeans there in the crowd that did not like the Jews, and they knew the Jews were going to bow down, and they come and tell Nebuchadnezzar that those Jews are not to bow down. He calls them forward. He says, when the flute blows and when the trumpet blows and when everything, you better be bowing down. And they say, we don't even need to wait for the to tell you we're not going to bow. But here's the words. And I added some of what was in brackets. I put it in. Here's what the verse says. It's from Daniel, the book of Daniel, chapter 3, verse 17, verse 18. They say this is the response of these ministers, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, to the king Nebuchadnezzar after they've already told him that we will not bow down. Oh, and he says to them, if you don't bow down, I'll throw you into the fire. And who will save you? Your God won't save you. Remember, their God, our God, had allowed the temple to be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar feels quite confident in telling these Jews, your God ain't going to save you. You better do what I tell you. You better bow down and worship my statue, or you will be killed. Here we come to the response of these three men, and they respond, behold, there is our God whom we worship. He can save us from the burn, from the fiery furnace, and from your hands, O king, he will save us. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not worship your God, neither will we prostrate ourselves to the golden image that you have set up. So what do we see over here from the response of these prophets to Nebuchadnezzar? That whether God would rescue them or not, they declared regardless, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not prostrate ourselves. So here we see a very clear verse that Rashi is bringing from the book of Daniel, where these prophets were warned that if you're not going to bow down to this idol that I made in my glory, this 60-foot tall monstrosity of me, the king, you'll be killed. And they respond, maybe we'll be saved, maybe we won't be saved. It's irrelevant. We are not risking, we're not saying we're not going to bow down to you because we think God will save us. We are recognizing that perhaps God won't save us, and that is not part of our calculation. We will not bow down regardless. God will save us. He won't save us. It makes no difference. We will never forsake our God. We will be willing to die rather than bow down to your idol. Now, by the way, the end of the story, because everyone wants to know the end of the story, right? The end of the story is he throws him, he gets so angry. His anger gets so mad. He tells the firemen, those days today firemen put out fires. Then they were making the fire. He tells the firemen, make the fire 7 times stronger. So they throw in all the fire they have. The fire is so hot. They tie them up with their hands and their feet, and they tie up in their robes and everything. They're all tied up that they can't move. The fire was so intense that when the people who were throwing them into the fire came close to the fire just to throw them in, they got killed from the heat of the fire. That's how hot the fire is. They throw them into the fire, and everyone's watching in absolute shock how these 3 men are now walking 4. There's 4 men walking. An angel came to protect them in the fire. And Nebuchadnezzar says, what do I see? I see 4 men. It looks like 4 men, and one of them looks like an angel walking in the fire. And he calls them to come out, and they come out of the fire. Not only were they not killed by the fire, they weren't even singed. Their clothing, their robes on them had been darkened by the fire. They didn't even have the smell of fire on them. That's how protected they were from the fire, and tremendous, absolute, amazing miracle. Okay? Whenever we pray to God, we answer a list of God answers, like you answered Abraham and Isaac. We say answers like you answered Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah by the fire. Okay. That is the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Let me just finish the quote from Rashi here, the next paragraph. God says, why should you be willing to sacrifice your life? I am the God who took you out of the land of Egypt. To be a God to you, I am the Lord. And as the commentaries explain, Rashi explains, I took you out on this condition. God is saying, why did I take you out of Egypt? So you can eat, gefilte fish and grain, or, shawarma, hummus, and lafas. I didn't take you out to enjoy good, European cuisine and some matzah balls. I took you out on this condition, to be willing to sacrifice your lives in sanctification of my holy name. That's the whole reason why we have a relationship. You should be willing to give everything you have for me. And then he finishes, I am God. Don't think that since it's an obligation, you won't be rewarded for sacrificing yourselves. Rather, I am the Lord, faithful to give you a reward to those who fulfill my Torah. Okay. So this, my friends, is a very interesting story. the classic understanding, as Rashi brings it, and again, his original idea taken from the rabbis of the Torah, of the Talmud, the Torah's Kohanim, that a Jew has a mitzvah not only not to transgress and to not do a sin which would desecrate and profane the name of God. When people would see how Jews don't follow the ways of God, they'll be turned away from God. But we have an active mitzvah to be willing to sacrifice our lives, to be willing to die for the sake of the Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying God's name. And not only are we willing to die, we shouldn't even expect a miracle to happen. Because if we expect a miracle to happen, we're already ruining it. God says, if you, the way Rashi writes it, which is not exactly the way it's written in the source, but and I'm not going to get to the differences in the source and the way Rashi writes it. But the way Rashi writes it, it's like a halacha, it's like a law. Rashi is telling us a law. If a person is willing to risk sacrificing his life, expecting a miracle, he already lost his chance for a miracle. You have to be willing to go without expecting any miracle in return. Now, I have a question for you. Before I tell the question, I want to tell you one more story. There's another story, a very famous story that describes the grace of what we discussed at the beginning of the class of the Kedoshim, of people that were willing to die for no reason other than they're willing to defend God's people, to defend the Holy Land. Well, in this case, not the Holy Land, but to defend Jewish people. So, hello, everyone that's watching. So the Talmud tells us, if you turn over your page, it's upside down, I know. It's a quote from the Gemara in Pesachim, 58. Before I read you the story, I'll explain to you the context. And then we'll read it inside. There was a young man, his name was Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Levi. And he had a near-death experience. Yes, Judaism, we do believe in the idea of a near-death experience. And we're not going to get too much into it right now. It's not for tonight's discussion. But even scientifically, there's enough data of enough people that have from different cultures and different parts of the world. So you can't say it's a cultural influence from different cultures and different places that have had similar experiences and described ways where their soul went out of the body. They could see the people around their body, and then they saw the light, and they were going through a light. Very similar descriptions. But anyway, so the Talmud tells us the story of this rabbi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who had this near-death experience. And he died on the medical, and then he came back to life. So let's see. Let me read the story. The Talmud says it to us. Talmud says, Rav Yosef, son of Rabbi Yeshua, came about to expire. When he returned to good health, his father said to him, "What did you see?" My chazisa, meaning when you were in the world of truth, you left this world. You were dead. The doctors declared you were dead. See in your near-death experience. So he says to his father, very famous words. Olam hafucher isi. I saw an upside-down world. The world that I saw there is the exact opposite of the way the world looks down here. What does that mean? He explained. Those above were below, while those below were above. Let me explain. I'll give you the commentary. Those above, meaning those people that in this life are considered big machers. Yeah, the important people, the big key rings. They walk around and they're making like a walkie-talkie and they have a in camp, right? What? The what? Yeah. Grace of Fadinas, the grace of machers, the grace of knackers. The people that are really important in this world are above the big shots. In the next world, they were below. They were below, not so important. And those who in this world they weren't given such prestige and importance in this world, upstairs in heaven, they're above. It's the opposite world, the upside down world. People that are supposed to be important are not so important. And people that don't pay attention to and don't get a lot of respect in this world, they're considered from the more prestigious people in the world to come. So his father says to him, you didn't see an upside down world. What you saw was a clear world. The world you saw, that was the real world. You saw a clear world. You saw the truth the way it is. Okay. Then they asked him, what else did you see over there? So I skipped in the translation, but he said, I saw that they said that happy is that the person who comes with his land, who remembers what he learned, so he's able to bring what he learned with him to heaven. And then he says as follows. I also heard that they were saying those executed by the government, the Roman government. The times of the Talmud was the Roman government, which was a terrible time of persecution for the Jewish people. Terrible, terrible, terrible decrees, including Rabbi Akiva. I'll talk about him soon. Terrible decrees. You know the story of the 10 martyrs, right? So terrible. So those executed by the government, that's what the angels were saying. They enjoy such exalted status. No one can stand in their enclosure. Meaning, of all the people that I saw in heaven, who had the highest standard, so high that nobody else could even stand there and even come close to being in their, like, you could be higher, and high doesn't mean physically. I'm on top of the bunk bed and you're on the bottom of the bunk bed, but it means in spiritual stature. But you can be in the same, who's higher than the other. But these people that were killed by the government, they are the martyrs of the Jewish people. They are in their own league. They're in their own category. They're not even in the same room as everybody else. They're in their own space. That's what he said. He saw was these martyrs in a very, very high place. Now the Talmud was trying to figure out which martyrs was he referring to. And he's going to talk about two groups of martyrs. I can tell you both their story. Well, I'll tell you two stories, and then we'll finish what the Gemara says. How's that? Deal? So, the first martyr that the Gemara talks about, and both these stories are important because you're going to see both stories are important. The first that the Talmud suggests possibly be the martyrs that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Shimon Levi, saw in heaven is Rabbi Akiva and his students. Who is Rabbi Akiva? Akiva was one of the greatest Jewish rabbis to ever live. He was actually a simple man. He was a shepherd until the age of 40, a scholar, building a yeshiva of 24,000 students that were killed by a plague during the Omer in which we are now. He then rebuilt Judaism after losing all of his students. He was not discouraged. He found 5 students and rebuilt a whole new Judaism from those, the whole new center of Torah with 5 students. Tremendously inspirational, such a wise man that when Moses saw the generations of all the generations, and he saw Rabbi Akiva teaching his students, it says that Moses felt embarrassed that he couldn't understand the wisdom of Rabbi Akiva. That's how great a man we're talking about. Rabbi Akiva, on his 120th birthday, which was on Yom Kippur, according to some, was taken by the Romans to be killed, executed as one of the 10 martyrs, which is a whole story of its own. He was publicly teaching Torah. He refused to stop teaching, but they didn't. They tortured him to death. How did they torture him to death? They took iron combs, they heated fire till these metal rakes, these metal forks, these metal combs were boiling hot from the fire, and then they peeled off the skin of his flesh with these hot iron combs. Can you imagine what kind of torturous death that is? To be scraped to death with hot iron combs. Right out of the fire on your skin, pulling apart your flesh. And that's how he was being killed. And as they were killing Rabbi Akiva, and his students are standing around, and by the way, it happened in Caesarea. And if you go, like those who went on the July trips, you stand in the place where this happened, this big Colosseum, and you see the amphitheater, rather, not the amphitheater, and you can see this is probably the exact spot Rabbi Akiva was murdered in front of thousands of Romans that were watching and cheering, and obviously also Jewish students that were there and crying and mourning. And the students that were with him, were being killed with him, that were with him, they saw that at the moment that he was being tortured to death, he was smiling. He was smiling. And they say to him, Akiva, ad kidei kach, so much that you can have such a love to God that at the moment that you're being tortured to death, you're being killed in the most horrific, barbaric way, a way that will make Hamas, jealous. With the barbaric, literally, Hamas also mutilated people and didn't just kill people. They tortured people to death. They mutilated people. That's what they were doing to Rabbi Akiva. They were torturing his body to death. And you're smiling? How could you be smiling at such a time of such intense pain, a time of such intense grief? How could you be smiling? He says to them as follows. Listen to what he says to his students. Every single day, every morning, every night, twice a day, I say the Shema. As mentioned before in the Shema, we say, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha B'chol levavecha. Should love Hashem with all your heart, or b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul. With all your soul, the rabbis say, means so much that you're willing to give your very soul to God, your very life, your very existence. You recognize my existence is only because God gives it to me, and therefore I'm ready to give my very life to God. And all my life, I've been asking myself, when will it come to my hand the opportunity to finally be able to do this mitzvah? Will I ever have the chance to be able to express such a powerful love to God that I'm willing to give God my very soul, my very life? And now, finally, according to someone who says 120th birthday, on my birthday, I have the opportunity to give my very life for God. Should I not smile? Indeed, that's how he died. He said the Shema. He said these words, and that's how his soul left his body. So this is one story of a martyr that's like on the highest level you can imagine. Such a holy man with such a level of desire to be close to God that all he wants is to fully express his love to God by actually giving his very life to God. He's been waiting. All of his learning, all of his success, all of his students, all of his classes, all of his yeshiva that he built, everything that he accomplished, he still felt, I'm missing something in life. I haven't yet truly proven my real love to God until now I can finally die for God. I've gone from being the chicken giving the eggs to being the pig giving its very life for the breakfast. Which reminds me of another story. That before I'm still in the middle of the Rashi, but I'll get back to it. But another similar story of there was I forgot my tea. I got so carried away. Thank you. Even though it's not hot anymore, it's still good. There was yeshiva students from the Mirror Yeshiva that were in Shanghai. Now, during the war, during the Holocaust, the way Jews from Russia escaped, my grandfather also went through Shanghai. Many Jews went through Peking, etc. They went to these DP camps. They came to Shanghai, where they were safe during the war. It was not easy. It was wartime. There was very limited food. There was limited rations. There was challenge, but at least they were physically safe from the Nazis there. And after they had to get from there to America, to Canada, to wherever they were able to go, to Israel. So there was a yeshiva in Shanghai called the Mirror Yeshiva. And although generally speaking, Jews were safe in Shanghai during the war, there were obviously people that didn't like the Jews, that had bought into the propaganda and the hatred for the Jews. And there were some Chinese people there that wanted to trick some of the students and to kill them. And they had made up they're going to go on the boat. I don't know exactly why they were going to go on the boat, but the plan was to take the yeshiva onto a boat. Maybe they thought they were going to go like safe passage to another country. And then when they'd be on the boat, they would throw them over the boat and kill them all. On the boat, no one know the difference. They killed them and that'll be it. There was one non-Jew who lived amongst this group, found out their plan, and he actually respected the Jews. He understood the value of the Jewish people, and he felt bad that they're going to go kill these innocent Jews or yeshiva students who sit and study and pray to God. So he went and he informed the police or the authorities about this plan to kill a number of students from the Mirror Yeshiva, and the plan was foiled because he had informed them. These troublemakers, these guys, these anti-Semites, they found out who was the person that had snitched on them, and they went and they beat him to death. They beat this non-Jew that had snitched on them. So the rabbi, or the yeshiva students, found out that this non-Jew that had saved their lives had been killed as a result of saving their lives. A lot of guilt. A lot of guilt. Jews are good at guilt even without someone being killed. When someone gets killed, can you imagine how much guilt they had? Here was this guy. He didn't have to do it. He wasn't part of the yeshiva. His life wasn't in danger. And yet this non-Jew risked his life to save them. And now he had been killed for saving these yeshiva students. They didn't know what to do with it. So they came to the mashgiach at the time. His name was Rabbi Hanan. I've forgotten Leibowitz. Hanan Leibowitz, I think. I don't remember his name. And they come to ask them, what is this? They come to his office, to his house, And they hear by the door, he's crying. He's crying. He also heard. They heard, and he also heard. The whole yeshiva heard. He's crying, and he's saying, Rabbeinu Shalom, the Master of the universe, this non-Jew never learned Torah, never prayed, never did a mitzvah. One time he saved the Jewish people, and immediately you gave him the chance to become a martyr for your name. I have been sacrificing so much for you. I've done so much for the yeshiva students. I've dedicated my whole entire life to serving you. How come I didn't merit to be killed for my sacrifice to you the way this non-Jew, after one act, was already able to become a martyr of your name? Already they understood the answer. They already understood. It wasn't the punishment. This person could have died a regular death. He could have just died as a regular Joe Schmo. Instead, he died, Anyway, so that's one story. That's one story of Rabbi Akiva, who wanted to die as a martyr, and he died as a martyr. Now here's the other story. Let's finish reading the text inside, and then I'll tell you the other story. So Rashi goes back. This is the Talmud, not Rashi. This is the Talmud in Pesachim. So if you go to that second paragraph, so I heard that they were saying those executed by the government enjoy such exalted status that no one can stand in their enclosure. And who are these martyrs? If you say that he's referring to Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues who were martyred, this cannot be. Why can it not be? Is their elevated status due only to the fact that they were martyred by the Roman government and nothing more? No. If the fact that Rabbi Akiva is in a league of his own in heaven, that's not proof that someone that died for the sake of God's name is automatically on the highest level possible. Because Rabbi Akiva was such a holy person, in addition to being a martyr for God, that it's quite possible that the reason why he was on a level of his own is because he was on a level of his own. He was righteous. He was holy. He never gave up for God. He never stopped teaching Torah publicly. Even when the Romans threatened to kill those who were teaching Torah in public, what did he do? He kept on teaching in public. So if Rabbi Akiva is the one that Rabbi Yosef saw in a level all of its own, that's not a proof that you get such a high level just for being a martyr for God. Rather, who was he referring to that he saw? Says the Talmud, Rabbi Yosef was referring to the martyrs of Lud. Harugi Lud. Lud is the name of a city. And who are the martyrs of Lud? So this, we have to look in Rashi, our friend from before, Shlomo Yitzchaki. He's also a commentator on the Talmud, and he tells us the story of the martyrs of Lud. And I'll also tell you the story of the martyrs of Lud. Good deal. What's the story of the martyrs of Lud? There was a king in that city, a governor, whose daughter was killed. She was killed. People had kidnapped her. I'm not sure if they had raped her, but they had killed her. And the king decided it was the Jews' fault, and he decided he was very angry, and he was going to kill the Jews, having killed their daughter. Now, the Jews had nothing to do with it. But back then, whether or not you had anything to do with it was irrelevant. Once the king decided, the governor decided that you were the ones at fault, you need a scapegoat, right? So the Jews became the automatic scapegoat, and the Jews were being considered guilty of having killed the governor's daughter. So there were two men. They were not religious men. They weren't rabbis. They weren't holy. I don't think they were religious. The names were Papias and Lulius. I don't have the Gemara in front of me. The names were Papias and Lulius was their name. And they came forward and they, quote unquote, confessed to the crime of having killed the governor's daughter. Knowing that they would be killed and punished and tortured and whatever for having killed the king's daughter, they confessed to it in order to take the blame off the rest of the Jewish community. And because they were willing to die to protect the rest of the Jewish community, says the Gemara about them, Rabbi Yosef said that he saw when he went to heaven in this near-death experience, that they were in a courtyard all of their own, a league of their own, that no one else could be on their level. Okay? That's who we're talking about. Not Rabbi Akiva. Not someone that spent his whole life dedicated to God. We're talking about people that did not live a life dedicated to God. But they still gave God everything they had. Understand? And because they were willing to give God everything they had, they went to the highest levels of heaven. Higher than those that lived a religious life and a holy life and a pure life and a spiritual life. They went to a higher level than that. So now I ask you a question. I want to hear your feedback for a second. I asked my wife this afternoon. She was whatever. Which act of sacrifice? I told you two stories tonight. I told you the story of Hananiah. It's more than two, but two that we said the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who were willing to die for God, and then God did a miracle, and their lives were saved. And then we share the story of Rabbi Akiva and of Papias and Lulius, who were willing to die for the sake of God, and they died for the sake of God. What's greater? To be willing to die for God and then experience the miracle where God saves you, or to actually die for God? Tough questions. Tough questions are good. What do you think? Let's look at the comments. What do you think is a greater act of sacrifice? What's a greater mitzvah? Not greater. What's a greater mitzvah? How do you, this week's Torah reading gives us a mitzvah. The mitzvah is v'nigdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. It's a mitzvah to be sanctified in the name of God. God's name should be sanctified amongst the Jewish people. It's actually in the passive. God's name should be sanctified. What is the best fulfillment of this mitzvah? How do we most sanctify God's name? Do we sanctify God's name most by being willing to die for God but then experiencing a miracle? Or do we experience the greatest fulfillment of being sanctified in the name of God when we actually truly give God everything we have and we actually die al Kiddush Hashem? It's the same? How is it the same? Okay. You're right. The intention is 100% the same on the intention. Question is, what's a greater Kiddush Hashem? Okay. So what's a greater Kiddush Hashem? Carmen says they're equally great. Yeah. The greater is to be saved. Why?
Why? Because you experience God firsthand. You've come face to face with Him. You've been touched by Him. You can go and report His wonderfulness to those around you. And the miracle has been witnessed by others who now see that God is overflowing.
Okay, so you're saying that by experiencing a miracle, you actually come close to God. You're face to face with God. You felt God, and now you're close to God. Dvorah, what did you want to say? The last one. The last one means where you actually die for God. Carmen says they're equally great. Prima says the first option is better, where you, I guess the first option where you have experienced miracles. Adrian says, Maria says shalom. And I apologize on my own page. I can't see the comments on my own page, which is kind of whatever. You can't do any more mitzvahs if you die. That's true, but that's God's calculation. We're talking about what's a greater mitzvah when you do a mitzvah, like when you do a mitzvah of putting on tefillin, right? So there's a lower quality pair of tefillin. There's a cheap mezuzah, which is, and then there's what? The mitzvah is to sanctify God's name, not to actually be willing to sanctify. Okay. Someone else? What do you say, Alison? What do you say? To die. To be willing to actually go for it. What do you say, Larry, Leo? What do you guys say?
I think the fact that people would feel God's hands like others, it depends. Are you talking about you or others? If somebody survives, it creates awe for those around.
Okay. So there's okay. I want to tell you one more story of a guy willing to die for God. Because the truth is, none of you said the right answer. You know why?
I'm going to change mine. Because the guy getting skinned alive at 120 years old,
Rabbi Akiva,
that he finally got to do the greatest mitzvah.
Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva. What about a Jew that was at the Supernova Festival and was just killed because there were Jews living in the land of Israel? So the right answer is Depends which rabbi you ask. And none of you said that. Yeah, it depends which rabbi you ask. So there's actually three perspectives. Here's a beautiful sikha of the rabbi. But I'm going to show you two different ways of understanding the mitzvah of sanctifying God's name. I'll give you a little hint. From one perspective, the greatest thing is to actually die for God. And from one perspective, the greatest thing is the experience miracle where you were willing to die, but God did a miracle. So, and they're both correct. I said, you're all wrong. You're all right. You're all right. What you're saying is 100% true. It's the same in your mind. The question is, what's a greater act of the mitzvah? What's a greater act of the mitzvah? You can put up a person can put up, two people can put up a mezuzah. One can put up a $70 mezuzah. One can put up a $500 mezuzah. They both did the same thing. Okay. Anyway, let me tell you another story. Last story of the night. Okay. You all know this story. It's a very famous story. It's a story of Abraham, Avraham Avinu, the very first Jew. Okay. Even before he was officially recognized as the first Jew, before we spoke to him, before we ever had this divine revelation, when he's introduced us in the Torah, there was a king, not Nebuchadnezzar, but Nimrod, both with an N. Okay, Nimrod. And Nimrod was officially the god of the universe at the time. He was the most powerful man. The animals were afraid of him, and the people were afraid of him, and everyone worshipped him. He pretended to have control over all living things. And the only guy that wasn't convinced of the great power of Nimrod was Avraham Avinu, Abraham. And there's many, many stories of how Avraham was willing to stand up to the stupidity of idol worship. Now it's not the time to talk about Avraham and his greatness and his heroism. I just want to tell you the story that's relevant for us. Eventually, after destroying all the idols in his father's store, eventually he's brought to Nimrod and forced to bow down to Nimrod. And Nimrod tries back and forth to convince him to bow down. Nimrod says, bow down. Don't you agree that fire is more powerful than anything else? So Avraham says, you should bow down to fire. And Avraham says, yeah, but water could put out fire. Okay, fine. So then bow down to water. He says, yeah, but the clouds can carry water. So then bow down to the clouds. But the wind can blow the clouds. So bow down to the wind. But you, man, who has holes in his mouth and his nose and is able to breathe in air and to hold air inside him. So man's more powerful than the air because we can inhale the air and swallow the air. So Nimrod says, exactly, so bow down to me. So Avraham says, yeah, but fire can burn you. And the water can put out the fire. You understand? Like, they went around in the circles, and everyone was seeing the brilliance of Avraham, and Nimrod got very upset. And very similar to the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he says, make the fire hotter. 3 days they were building up the fire, and then they threw a fire, and Avraham was walking around the fire like he was in the garden. Like a whole garden started to grow within the fire. And after 3 days in the fire, Nimrod saw that Avraham was still alive, hanging out in the garden. There were fruit growing inside this garden. And he took him out, and Nimrod bowed down to him. And Avraham says, don't bow down to me, bow down to God. And this is how the name of Avraham became famous in the whole wide world. Now, if you look in the Rambam, it seems that what was the greatest miracle? The greatest miracle is that the whole world saw the miracle God did. What God's greatness? What's the ultimate proof of God's greatness? That not only that a Jew is willing to die for God, but that God can save you. Before the Rambam, God can save you. And therefore, the argument could be made, and this is actually one perspective, that the greatest way of making God's name sanctified is by experiencing a miracle and not actually dying for God. In fact, look at the way the mitzvah is written. The verse that we read tonight, when we started our conversation, you can turn the page over if you want, doesn't say that the mitzvah is that you should sanctify God's name. What is the mitzvah? Read the opening verse that we started tonight's conversation with. Well, that's the first part. Don't desecrate. Yeah, you shall not desecrate. And then to say you shall sanctify God's name. What does it say? God's name should be sanctified. That's what it says, right? You should not desecrate. V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael, which in the Hebrew means, my name shall be made holy. I shall be glorified. I shall be sanctified. It's not that you need to do it. It's that it happens. No, it's we say in Hebrew, it's nifal. The Pharaoh explained to us the grammar over here. But the grammar is not that we're doing something. The grammar is it's happening. Right? You speak Hebrew? Okay. So vinik dashti doesn't mean that you sanctify God's name. It means that the name of God is being sanctified. So we can only do what we can do. What can we do? We can walk into the furnace. We can stand up to the terrorists of the universe. We can stand up to Nebuchadnezzar. We can stand up to Nimrod. We can stand up to Hamas. We can stand up to America. We can stand up to all the countries that are trying to stop us from doing what we need to do to defend ourselves. And we can say, I'm willing to die to defend my people, to defend my land, to defend my Jewish identity. Okay? Now, what happens after that is up to God. So if God allows us to be killed, that in itself is a tremendous sanctification of God's name, because look at the loyalty, look at the devotion, look at the sanctification that we're willing to die for God. But if God says, I want an even bigger miracle, a bigger sanctification, God will make a miracle happen. Again, we can't control this. It's not something we're actively doing. It's something that is happening from above. God can make a miracle. And now, not only is everyone talking about the sacrifice of the Jew that's willing to die for God, but even greater than that is the miracle that God did. Wow, God's name is really sanctified. That's one perspective. However, look in the Zohar. Zohar says that dying is the mitzvah is to die for God. That's the mitzvah. And in the Rambam, which is the codifier of Jewish law, Maimonides, the mitzvah is, it doesn't say anything about being saved. See, Rashi gave us a whole thing about if you have a miracle, Chananim Shal Nazari, that you live and that a miracle happens, so you shouldn't count on the miracle, it happened by itself. But in the book of Jewish law of Maimonides, there is no mention of being saved. The mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, the full parameter, the full extent of the mitzvah is to actually be killed. And if you look in the Zohar, that's the greatest mitzvah. To actually die for the sake of God's name. So you still did your part of the mitzvah, but God, that wasn't you did the mitzvah because you were willing to die for God. That is the end of the mitzvah, period. That's whether or not a miracle happened or you died is not part of your mitzvah. According to the one perspective. I'm now going to give you a different perspective. As I said, there's two perspectives. It all depends. If it was one perspective, my class would be boring. Learning Torah would be boring if it was so straightforward, right? The beauty of learning is being able to see a deeper perspective and then going even deeper to deeper perspective. So on a simple perspective, we all understand that the glorification of God's name is even greater when God does a miracle. Not only is a Jew willing to die for God, but a miracle. But I want to explain to you now a deeper perspective, how when the Jew does not experience the miracle, when the Jew dies for God, in some ways, that is the best way to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying God's name. How is that? So the Rebbe explains, and I have to ask you a simple question. Generally speaking, the Jews glorify death? No, the exact opposite. Jews glorify life. We glorify living. We don't. Other cultures, they make heroes out of dead people. In Judaism, we make heroes out of saving people, out of living people. So what's the explanation? How is it possible that according to both the Zohar and according to the Rambam, to Maimonides, which is primary Jewish law, that the ultimate fulfillment of the mitzvah of sanctifying God's name is when a Jew is actually killed for the sake of God without experiencing a miracle? And the answer, my friends, is what makes people remember the act? What makes people remember God? A miracle or a Jew that died for God that now gets into our kishkas and we feel the pain and the loss and the suffering of knowing that this person died for God? How many people, of course you prefer, how many miracles have our soldiers experienced in Gaza this year? thousands. The fact that we've only lost 200 and I don't know 250, whatever it is, in the course of 7 months of war in enemy territory, where every single building is booby trapped and rigged, and we're fighting literally guerrilla warfare in enemy territory and close combat, urban, with all the restrictions we have, with giving them advance notice before we go anywhere, 2 days advance notice, knock knock, get warning, we're coming soon, get ready, get your guns ready, get your You know how many miracles? We're experiencing miracles every day in Gaza. Every single day we're experiencing miracles. So every single soldier that goes into Gaza is willing to die for God. They're willing to die to defend their people. They're willing to die to defend the land that God gave us. And they have miracles experienced. Sounds to me. And God is a miracle for them. There's no emotional impact from that. When a soldier dies, Rahman al-Islam, should never happen again. Should not be another soldier to ever die again. But when a soldier dies, does every single Jew know the name of that soldier that died? Do we all see a picture of that soldier that died? Do we remember that? Do we talk about it? Do we feel the pain? And now it's 6 months later, 7 months later, and we're remembering him as a Zikaron, and we're feeling the pain of all those lost soldiers? We do. Next year, Simchas Torah, I don't know what I'm going to say next year, Simchas Torah, but Shmini Atzeret, not just next year, with Simchas Torah, the 1 year yard sign, we're going to be remembering all those Jews that were killed al Kiddush Hashem. And in 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, Mashiach should be long before that, we'll still be talking about those that died for God. If you look back to history, who are the people that we remember? Those that died. Even Rabbi Akiva, there were other rabbis that had miracles. We remember him for his ability to appreciate he was dying for God. And so the ultimate sanctification of God's name, really the ultimate sanctification, is not that God could do miracles. It's that Jews for God, and more Jews will follow and keep on dying. And like Hanan Yishal Nazari said that even if we won't be saved, that won't impact us. They're fighting against soldiers and they're fighting in Gaza, not fighting because they think God will do a miracle for them. They're fighting ready to die. And they know that others have died. And they're still willing to fight. And because, sadly, we've had to experience loss, we remember that. That's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. That's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem.
You're saying the ultimate
Is the ultimate. Thing a second ago. It's a different, but it fits to the message here. Worry about these different communities, different rebbes that were sharing the miracles of their rebbe. And so one chassid from one Hasidic community, not Chabad, said, "My rebbe, there was a friend, whatever. He had a big problem. He didn't know what to do. Someone was sick, and he came to the rebbe gave a blessing, and everything was healed." Another one said, "I know a story. I came to the rebbe. I was losing money in business. I asked for a blessing. Miracle happened. I got a deal, and my business was saved." And the third one, I think it was a Chasar Gerari, if I'm not mistaken. He owned a big sugar factory, and he says, "I had a huge investment of lumber, of logs, and it's, you make a lot of money, but it's very risky because the winter comes and you can't transport the logs; they get trapped, and I asked Rebbe for a blessing. The Rebbe gave me a blessing, and I lost all my money. I lost all my money." So the other Hasidim from the other communities, so what's the miracle? What's the miracle? The miracle is that I'm still a Chassid. Understand? The miracle is that even though I lost my money, I still believe. I don't believe because a miracle happened to me. I believe because I believe. That's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. That's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. Now, of course, we don't want to die. We want to see God's miracles. We want to see God's open hand. We want to be able to say, to raise beautiful families. I said Judaism promotes living, not dying. But yet, we have to recognize that when someone is actually killed al Kiddush Hashem, they enter to the highest places in heaven because their death becomes an everlasting reminder to us of heroism, of courage, of bravery. That's the ultimate. You look back, I'm looking at this now today for stories of people that died Telling these stories. But then I came across a story of a soldier. His name was Roi, who jumped on a grenade in 2005 in Lebanon. That was right. What was his name? Roi Klein. You see? Why do you remember Roi Klein's name? Everyone remembers his name. It's exactly that. Someone's name came. Roi Klein jumped. The stories of grenades too now. What's his son? Poland, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. They were throwing grenades, and you see on the dash cam video, they were throwing grenades into the bomb shelter where there's 21 people something hiding in this bomb shelter, and another kid what was his name? Anel was throwing them out, threw it out, and then he lost his hand. Hirsch. He also the one that I'm saying. So same story. And you know his name. Of all the people that were killed on October 14th, you don't know all their names by heart, but I know you know his name. And Roi Klein, we all know his name. Now, if he would have had a miracle happen and the grenade would not have detonated, he would have been a hero. A miracle would have happened, but today no one will know his name. No one will be carrying the inspiration of his sacrifice till today. Understand? And so the greatest act of Kiddush Hashem, the greatest heroes in the Jewish people, are those people who maybe were not always religious, who maybe didn't have tremendous heroism and jump on top of grenades. But because they actually gave their lives for God and they actually gave God everything that they could give, they become the eternal heroes of the Jewish people who are remembered forever and ever. And that's really what I think we say never again. I know Rand just came back from Poland. When I walked into the room and I said, never again doesn't mean we won't die. What are we remembering the heroism of the past for? Why is it important for Jews to know our history? It's something the Rebbe said, what I'm going to say now. Why is it important for us to know our history? Not just so we should know to defend ourselves, not be led like sheep to slaughter again, which is also important. But besides for being ready to defend ourselves, we remember the heroes of the past generations, the martyrs, those who died, to be inspired by how much they loved who they were, how much they were willing to die for who they were, to give us that same level of commitment to our religion. To be a Jew means not only that I say never again that if there ever be anti-Semitism, I'll come out of the woodwork to go and protest against anti-Semitism. We remember the martyrs. We remember the soldiers that were killed. We remember the 30,000 Jews that were killed in Israel from enemies in the course of our history. Why do we remember them? Because remember, if you were born a Jew, you probably came from heroes and heroines who at different points in history chose to relinquish their property, to give up their homes, to give up their businesses, sometimes to give up their lives for the sake of what they believed in, for the sake of their religious principles, for the sake of their commitment and their connection to God. And when we remember that, we are inspired by those that were killed, not just to die for God, but to live with that level of commitment, that level of sacrifice, that even living, we're willing to give God everything that we have. And that, my story, is a friend of the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, and remembering the 30,000 people that have been killed in Israel on Yom HaZikaron. God willing, very, very, very soon. Tonight, right now, Shiach should come. Should be the end of remembering the dead, because all those that have died and sacrificed their lives for God will come back to life. B'ezrat Hashem, very, very soon. Good night, my friends. L'chaim.
Rabbi, I have a question.
You have a question? Yes.
So when
Good evening, everyone that's watching. Yes. 45 died in Meron is also sad. Yes.
when Jews
Oh, what's that? Anyone wants, I just have to make this announcement. Anyone wants a postcard of what the Beis HaMikdash looks like? Because if you go into Gaza, so the soldiers say, every home you go to, they have pictures of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Everywhere you go, they're going to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So Jews should be walking around with postcards and have on our houses pictures of the temple. Remember the third temple. So Larry has extra postcards here. If anyone wants a postcard and a picture of the temple, you're more than welcome to come take and enjoy. Yes. And now your question.
Okay, so when we pray to God, so you told the story of the three guys who went to God looking for a miracle, right?
Yes, and the screen. Good night, everyone. Lila Tov. Lila Tov. Yes. I'm listening.
Looking to save the business, the maid farm. I thought we were not meant to pray with heads for ourselves, only God.
Who says you can't ask for yourself? That's a good question. Who said you can't ask for yourself?
My thought.
You ever opened up?
That seems selfish.
Did you ever open up a prayer book?
No.
Okay, so if you open up a prayer book, you're going to see that the Amida is full of
Which
prayer.
way?
There's a prayer book. So in the Amida, which is the main prayer, you have three prayer blessings. It's not reading. Grace and so knowledge of Father's keep reading. Heal us, bless us. Turn to the next page. Oh, does not end?